The FBI defines a criminal enterprise as a group of individuals with an identified hierarchy or comparable structure engaged in significant criminal conduct. Sadly, in 2010, Wisconsin's locally owned and highly subsidized short-line railroad fully met this definition. Wisconsin and Southern illegally gave record amounts of money, illegal money, to the anti-high-speed rail candidate for governor, Scott Walker. Considered by some to be the first criminal held accountable for the ongoing saga that many know as Walkergate, Bill Gardner now stands as a convicted felon, convicted on 2 Class 1 felonies, excessive campaign contributions, and illegally bundling these excessive contributions. But it was not just Bill Gardner that was involved with these serious crimes against our democracy. Some employees of the railroad were co-conspirators. They gave money to the anti-high-speed rail candidate, now Governor Scott Walker, and were paid back for these contributions from the railroad. Neither Gardner nor his employees can credibly argue that they thought it was legal to funnel money to Scott Walker in this manner. If they thought it was legal, the railroad would have just given the monies directly. This was done to circumvent campaign finance laws. And in fact, the money was laundered. It was hidden through the employee's checkbook, but the employees were then paid back. Even if they want to claim they didn't know any better, no one else is allowed to escape responsibility for their criminality by proclaiming they just didn't know. We are all assumed to know the law. Felon Bill Gardner got off easy. America has a 3-tiered justice system, a very harsh system of rules for the poor, another more lenient system for the middle class, and if you're a multimillionaire like Bill Gardner, a slap on the wrist is all you'll get. The fines that get levied are literally nothing compared to multi-million-dollar bank accounts. The State Government Accountability Board fined the railroad about $170,000, and Bill Gardner got 2 years probation. And 7 employees who were co-conspirators in these felonies were fined $250 each. Us regular folks convicted of Class 1 felonies would face fines of up to $10,000 and up to 3.5 years in prison. No one received any jail time at all, and the 7 co-conspirators didn't even get probation. Pretty sweet deals if you can get them. Reportedly, Bill Gardner did some community service consisting of a presentation to a small group of high school students about careers in the railroad industry. Bill Gardner got rich the old-fashioned way. Daddy's Tool Company, Gardner Bender Rebar Tool Company, which he sold, and then he invested the proceeds into the Wisconsin and Southern Railroad. At the time, it was a struggling short line operating on state-owned tracks via leases and highly subsidized by the state of Wisconsin. The lines that the original Wisconsin and Southern operated on were old Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific tracks, better known to the public as the Milwaukee Road. By all accounts, Wisconsin Southern thrived under Bill Gardner's stewardship. But then again, remember, this was a highly subsidized rail operation that the taxpayers helped keep afloat and helped grow. The rail industry likes to complain that its competitors that use publicly built highways, publicly financed waterways, and airports, air traffic control systems get subsidies that the rail industry does not. But there's a big difference here. When the public invests in roads, waterways, and airports, these facilities are open to any and all takers. No one has a monopoly on the resulting assets. In America, because railroads are owned by private companies, subsidies to the rail industry in America actually result in direct subsidies to for-profit corporations. Corporations that have monopolies on the tracks they own or control. That is why it is very problematic to talk about subsidizing American railroads. In fact, what we're doing is socializing the costs of profitable private enterprises and allowing them to privatize the profits, keep the monies they earn on our public investment. Remember, railroads essentially operate as monopolies on the tracks they own or control. While Bill Gardner is often given credit for the growth of the railroad, it is important to remember this has always been a highly subsidized railroad operating on state-owned tracks. And the state of Wisconsin pays the Wisconsin and Southern to maintain and keep those tracks up to higher standards. State and federal grants are often used to upgrade lines along this right-of-way.
Some of us are aware that it's good for us to care. Some of us feel the icy wind, poverty blowing in the air.
So red flags went up in December 2011 when the media started reporting that the Wisconsin and Southern, Bill Gardner's ownership in this railroad, was being sold to WATCO, a holding company out of Kansas, the largest transportation holding company in the world. Because WATCO is a privately held international holding company, details about who owns it directly or indirectly are not public record. The same is true of Bill Gardner's ownership in Wisconsin Southern. Private enterprises are not required to open their books or to be scrutinized by the public. The fact of the matter is, no one can actually verify who has controlling interests directly or indirectly of either of these corporate entities. The media did not report the WATCO, Wisconsin and Southern transaction promptly. This created another problem. The Federal Surface Transportation Board, which has to approve all rail mergers and acquisitions in America, placed approval on a fast-track schedule, only allowing a one-week window over the holiday season for comments and concerns to be brought forward to be considered in the decision whether or not to approve the merger, the acquisition actually, of Wisconsin and Southern by WATCO Transportation. Of course, Bill Gardner, Wisconsin and Southern, WATCO, and Scott Walker's DOT all had an opportunity to put comments and information into the decision process that made it look like there was nothing to see here and that there were no concerns. This was going to be a routine, simple acquisition. This was actually wholly untrue. And when a group of legislatures filed a letter demanding a 60-day waiting period so that a reasonable investigation could be done and appropriate information be given to the Surface Transportation Board, this request was denied because the approval had already been a done deal. The window of opportunity to put information on the record was over. Curiously, these legislatures, led by Assemblyman Brett Halsey, no longer have any interest in this affair at all and have washed their hands of anything to do with the WATCO Wisconsin Southern merger acquisition. The Honorable Cynthia Brown at the Surface Transportation Board had no choice but to approve this acquisition because nothing was on the record that indicated there might be any concerns whatsoever. Now remember, there are two ways to mislead. There are lies of commission, meaning people actually say things that are false, and then there are lies of omission. That's when information is withheld, left out, so that a story is not actually complete. To some, it appears that the Surface Transportation Board was fully misled through this approval process. Kathleen Chung of Wisconsin's DOT clearly stated on the record that there were no concerns in the sale at all and that the state of Wisconsin was going to bless it as totally a good thing. Perhaps this was a lie of commission, but we'll explain that later. There are also lies of omission, and the Surface Transportation Board was never told that Bill Gardner was a convicted felon, and he was actually on probation and was now selling his ownership in the railroad for millions of dollars in a secret deal, literally making multi-millions of dollars on his crimes. The crimes of bundling campaign contributions in excessive amounts for the anti-high-speed rail candidate, Governor Scott Walker. Remember, there is an ongoing state investigation, a John Doe probe, into the criminality that appears to underlie Scott Walker's ascent to power. There are also reports that a federal investigation is underway as well. To many, it appears that the Gardner bundling was actually part of a massive pay-for-play scheme that directly benefited Governor Scott Walker. Scott Walker's DOT did not bring up any issues related to the validity of the leases that Bill Gardner was selling because remember, the Wisconsin and Southern is a paper railroad that largely operates on state-owned tracks, which are leased through leasing agreements through a small number of transportation authorities. Not only does the Wisconsin and Southern lease most of its right-of-way, but the state of Wisconsin actually heavily subsidizes the maintenance and improvements of these trackage and lines.
Some of us are aware that it's good for us to care. Some of us feel the icy wind, poverty blowing in the air.
Voices, after a considerable amount of stonewalling from attorney Kathleen Chung at the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, was finally able to get copies of these leases, but only after going to the Wisconsin Supreme Court and filing a complaint that this particular lawyer was not following the code of ethics. The leases that Voices was able to obtain clearly have clauses in them, representations that the operator, the owner of these leases, cannot commit crimes out of operations. Yet here we have Bill Gardner, the owner of the Wisconsin and Southern, illegally bundling campaign contributions in record amounts for the anti-high-speed rail candidate, giving money to Scott Walker illegally directly from rail operations. While Scott Walker's DOT claims that these issues were all addressed and resolved, the fact of the matter is none of this is anywhere on the public record, and this was all withheld from the Honorable Cynthia Brown, the woman who approved the merger at the Surface Transportation Board. The decision issued by the Honorable Cynthia Brown clearly contained clauses to allow petitions to revoke this approval to be filed if it can be shown that information provided the board during the fast-track approval process was either misleading or was not complete. An objective look at the record clearly suggests that there was misleading information provided to the Surface Transportation Board, and Cynthia Brown was given anything but complete information. Since that decision was rendered, the Capital Times, which is a Lee Enterprise publication, actually part of Wisconsin State Journal, a right-wing newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin, has verified that Bill Gardner has now sold the remaining interests of his ownership in Wisconsin and Southern. Reportedly, the entire deal for all of his ownership shares was about $70 million. To some, it appears that Gardner was forced out of the Wisconsin and Southern by WATCO, the largest transportation holding company in the world. The Capital Times initially reported their story this way. However, they seem to have had a change in heart and have now printed a story that seems to question everything else they have ever reported on this sale. An important part of this story is that WATCO Transportation's own documents directly state Koch Industries, also out of Kansas, is their largest customer. That's the Koch brothers, the folks that poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Scott Walker's recall and his election in 2010. Perhaps more significantly, Capital Times has reported that one of the reasons Bill Gardner stepped down is because he didn't appreciate the way he was treated as WATCO started to integrate Wisconsin and Southern in a manner that was going to connect it with its other rail lines and its corporate operations. You see, in order to get this fast-track approval with only a one-week window to submit comments and information for consideration on the decision, WATCO had to represent that the lines it was purchasing from Wisconsin and Southern did not connect with any railroad it already owned, and that there were absolutely no plans to purchase other rail lines that would allow them to connect it with their other American railroad assets. A petition to revoke this approval is being prepared to file with the Surface Transportation Board, and some preliminary documentation and documents have been forwarded to Cynthia Brown to start this ball rolling. The record will clearly show that because of the way the approval process was structured, important information was left off the record, and some contain the information provided to the Surface Transportation Board is outright misleading. Curiously, Wisconsin and Southern has an advocate, essentially a lobbyist that is employed directly by the state of Wisconsin, but who answers to what is now the largest transportation holding company in the world, a private interest that is directly tied to the Koch brothers via the volume of business this company does with the other. This is another reason to revoke the sale of Wisconsin and Southern to WATCO Enterprises. It is not right that the taxpayers are not only subsidizing the operations of this railroad, but that they are actually paying a lobbyist in the state capitol to advocate for their best interest with no accountability to taxpayers and the public at large. It is not our intention to question responsible investment in transportation and even railroad infrastructure, but this deal does not pass the smell test. If the largest transportation holding company in the world, WATCO, wants to run Wisconsin and Southern, they cannot be allowed to purchase leases that reasonably appear to have been broken and continue to operate a highly subsidized railroad when in fact they now have the efficiencies of a worldwide privately held corporation behind them. To those that would contend stories like this are somehow partisan, let's be clear. This is about the rule of law. This is about fiscal responsibility. This is about accountability, personal accountability and corporate accountability. This story is actually about the rule of law. And does it apply to multinational privately held corporations, or does it just apply to you and me as individuals? Voices will break another story soon about the upcoming purchase of additional rail lines that will not only cost the taxpayers of Wisconsin more than $50 million, but will result in additional subsidies to the Wisconsin and Southern, actually WATCO Transportation, and it appears that the purpose of this rail operation is to support sand fracking for Koch brother interests in Texas. So please keep watching Voices TV and take a look at our blog, MadisonVoicesBlog.com, to keep up on these breaking developments. It is time for taxpayers to hold public officials accountable, and private interests that receive public subsidies need to answer to the rule of law as well.